No problem.
Okay. So, really excited to see you here today, Arnout. So really excited. Thank you for giving us your time. Obviously, with the situation in Ukraine at the moment, it's something that we're trying to talk about. It's something we're trying to speak about, be vocal and as vocal as possible. So, Arnout, just introduce yourself to our listeners a little bit, and just let me know what are your thoughts. What have you been hearing about Ukraine on that part of the world, in your part of the world, in the Netherlands?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm very happy to be able to contribute in any small way that I can to the plight of the Ukrainian people right now. Just a brief introduction. My name is Arnout Lansberg. I'm one of the senior PR consultants at MCS PR. We're a pretty small tech-focused PR company in the Netherlands, and yeah, we're seeing the developments, of course, in Ukraine. It's a terrible situation that no one expected that would happen in our region in Europe in 2022. I also, but that's my personal opinion, have a feeling that a lot of the political leaders and maybe some of the business leaders or anyone, they didn't want to see that happening, even though the signs were becoming increasingly clear that something was going to happen. And that is, to me, it was kind of surprising to see that governments were still blindsided or surprised by the fact that this did in fact happen. I think the signs were there pretty clear.
For a long time.
Russia did follow like the standard playbook for these kinds of operations. They literally copied the way that Germany started operating in World War II towards Czechoslovakia, and later, of course, other European countries and Poland and everything. And Russia basically followed that same playbook. And yeah, so the situation now is there is great concern and support here in the Netherlands, at least. What I've seen and read about are that there are lots of support activities being organized, ranging from protests to people driving towards the Ukrainian border with cars to pick up refugees and to deliver relief supplies. We just had a large charity action on Monday in the Netherlands that collected over 100 million euros for relief to the people of Ukraine. So there's great concern and compassion for what is happening. Probably because I think the people in the Netherlands did know that they did see Ukraine as a very Western society, very modern. So it's something that people didn't believe would be possible in this day. And at the same time, we're being faced with the indirect consequences. I mean, obviously, we have nothing. We have not in any way coming near to what the people in Ukraine are experiencing right now, with all the terror and attacks and everything that's going on. But in terms of economic consequences, we're starting to see the first signs. Very simple: energy prices are skyrocketing. There's concern about people in the Netherlands with very low incomes that are going to be devastated by the prices. And again, this is not near the same level of what people in Ukraine are experiencing, but
it still has a knock-on effect.
It definitely has an effect. And obviously there is the great worry that the conflict will spread. Will it stop at Ukraine, or will countries like Latvia and Estonia be next? Will Poland be next? So that is definitely a major worry. what's going to happen, nobody knows. On one hand, based on the news reports that we're seeing from several sources, it looks like the campaign from a Russian point of view is definitely not going the way they had planned it. What looks like way more casualties and
failure,
lots of logistical problems. So it's incredible to see Ukraine put up such an incredible fight and apparently a very effective defense also. At the same time, there is this worry about, so what will happen if things really go wrong for Russia in Ukraine? Will they resort to, chemical, biological, even nuclear weapons? Will they try to use the Chernobyl nuclear plant as a kind of a pressure way of pressuring Europe? What else is going to happen? And of course, the economic boycotts that are happening throughout the world, that's also going to have some kind of effect on Dutch businesses. Obviously, if they were doing business in Russia, and they've now pulled out, that's going to have a consequence. If they were reliant on expertise from Russia or from Ukraine, that's going to have an effect on businesses. So
have you seen that a lot? Have you seen with Dutch businesses? Have you seen many of them pulling out so far? Is there some kind of reluctancy to pull out, or is people very much willing to get out of Russia and leave the market?
I can only refer to what I've been seeing in the local in our newspapers and on TV and radio and such, and they tend to focus on the larger companies, obviously. And what I've seen so far is that there is definitely, just like what you're seeing with other multinationals, very clear resolve to say, okay, no, we're pulling out of Russia, we're pulling our people back, we're halting our operations. Is that also going to happen, or is that also happening for small or mid-sized businesses? I can't really say right now. The Netherlands is an economy that's very much based on SMBs. Some of them may have very tight links to Ukraine or to Russia, and how that is affecting them and what their steps are going to be is, of course, it's a more challenging questions for them, because their reliance on that part of the business could be much greater than that of the really large multinational tech companies from either Europe or America. But overall, the feel that you get from the news reports is that there is a clear resolve to make it very clear to Russia that this is not acceptable, and this has to stop.
It's definitely true. I mean, when they're smaller business, they depend obviously on their markets there. So it's not so easy. It's easier for a bigger company to pull out and take that hit, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what about, in the Netherlands at the moment, you were saying about there was kind of the idea that it was going to happen for quite a few months. That was not on the news, but the Western leaders kind of didn't react to it. Yeah, they didn't react in the way that we thought. From what you know in the Netherlands, did many companies prepare for this kind of invasion, for a war which could perhaps spread, or is it still business as usual? What did they see?
I think that the companies too probably didn't want to see this happening. They obviously did see the buildup of Russian forces and the threats that were being made. And I think it's for many companies, and again, it's my personal view, is that a lot of them didn't want to see this happening, and therefore they were possibly reluctant to prepare in a good way for the eventuality that, as it turned out, that this invasion did happen. And again, some companies may have done so, may have been better prepared than others. But in general, there was still this idea, well, they're threatening, but it's not going to happen. We're not doing this in this age anymore. And then, of course, it did.
Do you know what? I think that was kind of the hope, wasn't it? It was the hope of everyone that it wasn't going to happen.
Of course.
Because I was in Ukraine at the time. I've lived there for the last 2 years. I managed to get back, luckily, to the UK before, but it was between all my friends, my colleagues, we just didn't see it happening. When you're there, you see people living free. It's not something you can imagine. So yeah, definitely. What about,
on the other hand, I mean, if you look at the Netherlands has a kind of sad history with Ukraine/Russia, because in, I believe it was 2017, 2016, there was the downing of the Malaysian Airlines airliner, which had lots of Dutch casualties, and by chance the tribunal around the shoot down of that flight, I believe it was MH17, that's coming kind of to a highlight right now with the positions. And so the relationship with Russia in that sense was already quite strained, and this kind of, I don't know, it proves how these things can work, and maybe that was for some companies a reason that they did see maybe something happening, but I'm not sure about that. But it is something that is in the back of minds also of people.
Definitely, it's the souring of the relationship is already there, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
What about now, though? So in the Netherlands now, from what you can see, what you've read, what you know, is it business as usual for companies now, or have they started to make some kind of plans for if it was to go further? Has it affected their businesses?
I think for certain industries, it has affected or it's beginning to affect their business. That can be in very, very simple but indirect terms. For instance, the skyrocketing fuel prices have an impact on logistics companies, on employees. So there has to be a change in that. Of course, the general skyrocketing of energy prices in terms of Russian gas, for which we are partly dependent, not as much as Germany, fortunately, but they're still partly dependent on Russian gas. That's going to have an impact on businesses here. In terms of working with companies in Russia or Ukraine, obviously that is going to have an impact as well. Are they already changing, or is their business model, or are they adapting to that? My guess is they must be, because this has been going on now for 2 weeks.
Over 2 weeks now, just over,
yeah. I mean, a war in such a region, it must have an impact, and it must mean that they are very much busy in trying to see how they can, meet the challenges that this provides, because obviously their business for business for companies in Western Europe and in the Netherlands, it has to go on. It sounds sour if you look at what's actually going on in Ukraine, of course, but
everything continues,
doesn't it? Go on, and that at the same time means that there is a capacity to, for instance, host, receive refugees from Ukraine in the Netherlands. There are people hosting refugees at home. There are the government is really getting ready to be able to receive.
They've been quite welcoming, have they?
Very welcoming, yeah. I mean, the outpouring of support in that sense has been really great, I think, and that, of course, also for that you do need to have an economic system that is still an economy that's still working, because there needs to be a way to provide for these people.
Definitely.
And
Yep.
maybe at some point they will need jobs, be it temporary or fixed jobs.
Take them in. Mm-hmm.
You take them in. You see where where they can be employed. Right now, it's probably in like emergency shelter mode, just making sure that people that come to the Netherlands from Ukraine have a bed, have a place to shower, have food, bring family members that have lost each other, making sure that they get in touch again with each other. And from there, the next step would be to see, okay, so how can we, get these people a more permanent or semi-permanent housing or place for them to stay, and for something for them to do and to contribute and help, because just sitting somewhere else without employment must also be very terrible, of course.
Especially while this is going on. I mean, whilst it's going on, you need to be active. Yeah, you need to keep your mind active, most definitely. I guess the main thing is that the West, Europe in general, is welcoming at the moment, and they are saying, okay, just get to safety. Okay, we haven't got it all sorted yet. We're not ready for this, but you need to be in safety. I guess also it opens up perhaps a lot of opportunities for companies, maybe with all of these big companies that are now leaving the Belarusian markets. It opens up opportunities for other specialists in the West to take on these projects as well. But I guess companies are tackling between opening up and also being careful with what they take on, not knowing what's going to happen.
One of the things that I would never call this a positive development, but at the moment there is a huge shortage in employees in all types of industries, but especially in the IT sector. So in that sense, the people that are coming over from the Ukraine and that have certain skills are going to be very much welcomed by Dutch companies, I would assume. So that is a different situation. If for instance, we were several years ago, that there was a huge unemployment problem in the Netherlands. People couldn't get jobs. Now it's the other way around. So businesses from large, small, and in all sectors are really clamoring to get the right people on board. And in that sense, the people coming from Ukraine may find also a very welcoming environment for them to find employment and get their lives back on track. And of course, hopefully returning to Ukraine as soon as possible.
I think this is the hope for most of them, and I think this is why a lot of them do believe, a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues, okay, for now they need to be in safety. Give them, all they want is the opportunity to be in safety, work a little bit, do something to help, either send money back to Ukraine to help build it. They don't care. But they will go back, because Ukrainians always will go back. So I think that's something that governments and institutions need to realize, that they're not just going to come, take the money, not work. They're going to come work and then go back when the time is safe to. I think that's what the notion is right now also, that this is not a permanent situation. To put it very extremely, so these people are coming here to steal our jobs or anything. No, that's definitely not the idea right now. Although you never know how that might change over time. That's something we don't know how that's going to work out. But at the moment, like I said, it's very welcoming, and we're trying to do what we can to support Ukrainians. Very nice. And a last question for you, Arnout, with regards to the West, with regards to Netherlands, is there anything that you believe we could do as a collective to help the situation in Ukraine? Are we doing enough? Are we doing all we can with the support and the aid? Is there anything more we can do?
I think you can always do more. The question is, how do you set that up? For instance, in the first few days, there were reports in the media about huge amounts of relief goods being collected and being donated, from toys to sleeping bags and all kinds of stuff. And that, of course, itself presents a new problem in terms of logistics. How are you going to get all that stuff to the people that are needing that? So what you're seeing now is that is getting more and more organized. And I would guess that the main thing that's needed for supporting Ukrainians is to donate money. Now, like I said, we did have a very large charity action in the Netherlands this Monday that brought really a lot of money. But that, I think, will have to continue. Of course, the steps that are being taken by both the Western governments and Western companies, pulling out of Europe, pulling out of Russia, stopping, no longer buying Russian gas or Russian products or anything that shows, makes it very clear that this is not acceptable. The big challenge, of course, is what we are hearing is that the Russian people are getting a very different picture about this war than we are seeing in the West. Free media, independent journalism is very much restricted, of course, in Russia. And what the measures are and the actions that have been taken so far will, in the end, affect the Russian people, the ordinary people, who I would assume have no interest at all in invading that. This was a decision made by the Russian government, obviously, and as is usually the case in any kind of war, it's not the people, the people that live in the country that are doing this, but they are the ones that are being affected by this. Again, nowhere near in the way that people in Ukraine are being affected, but this is something that is going to hit the Russian people in a very significant way. And I think there should be a level of caution in there is no sense in getting the Russian people to a level of poverty or anything like that, because that would probably play into the hands of the people that are really creating this aggression, because then they can say, well, you see, the West, they're only trying to keep you down and everything. And in that sense, steps like that are being taken. It might seem symbolic, but the steps that are being taken in Western Europe about seizing the assets of the Russian oligarchs that are supporting the government, hopefully that has some kind of impact.
You hope it's the big players, yeah. You hope it's the big players, the oligarchs, who actually have the influence to be able to stop this.
Yeah, so, yeah, because definitely. They are also the ones that are supporting this in some way, and those are the people that even though it might not affect them to the level that it would affect the ordinary Russian on the street, they're still going to be hit by that if they're not going to be able to live their luxury life anymore that they used to. And yeah, other than that, there have been, of course, lots of discussions about the no-fly zone in over Ukraine, about the Polish MiGs being transferred to Ukraine, and that is obviously a very, very difficult discussion, because, like I said, in European countries, there definitely is a worry about becoming directly involved in this war and how that might escalate further. I can't answer that question. I really don't. I'm not expert in that. It is a worry. And the immediate reaction would be, yes, of course we should start a no-fly zone, but that would mean directly becoming involved in the conflict, and that is something that you hear everywhere, is that the governments, the Western governments, are very reluctant to do for fear of creating a very highly escalating situation.
You know, it's one of those things for Ukrainians. Obviously, they want it. It's their home.
Yeah,
it's their land being bombed. So we can understand
absolutely
why they want it closed.
Yeah.
But I guess the Western countries, the Western leaders need to make that decision. Which one do they weigh up? So it's very difficult for Ukrainians to just see it happening and not feel as if they get any help at the moment. So
and sad, the sad thing is, again, if you compare this to what was happening in Europe during the beginning of World War II with Germany, you had more or less the same situation where, you know, Hitler was going into Czechoslovakia and Austria, and you know, the other European powers at that time were going, well, we don't want to get involved because of what they had experienced 20 years earlier in the First World War. They were understandably very reluctant about you know, taking a firm stance. Mm-hmm. But you don't know what would have happened if they did. Maybe they could have prevented some of the things that were happening eventually in World War II, maybe not. And this is kind of the same situation where you have, well, the instinct is say, well, we need to get involved and do something. At the same time, we want, at all costs, we want to prevent scaling up this conflict to involve more countries and more victims, and that is something that is, of course, paramount. But
it's one of those things where hindsight is easiest. Yeah. So after it's happened, then of course we can all say, yes, we should have done that. But in that situation now, where we don't know which way it's going to go, it's a very, very, very difficult situation. I think there's a lot of support for it, but there's also a lot of hesitation, because it's the risk of a World War III, which has perhaps already started. Perhaps it already has started.
Maybe when we look back in 20, 30 years, we can say, well, this was the start of World War III. Let's hope not.
Exactly.
Let's hope that there are cooler heads that prevail in that sense. The only, if you could name it, positive thing that is coming out of that is that the response from Western Europe has been way more unified than people would have imagined 2 or 3 years earlier, where they're literally closing ranks and working together and going the same way, and being very clear in presenting a single voice, saying, well, this has to stop. And in that sense, we could also maybe look back in 20, 30 years that assuming that there is no World War III, which let's assume that is not going to happen, this could mean a very large change in how Western Europe is organized politically. Maybe it will become more cohesive. Maybe we'll see a much more unified Europe. Let's hope so. Maybe other things will happen. But this is definitely one of those moments in history where there are going to be very, very large changes resulting from this. Yeah.
You know what, Arnout, I think that's a really good place to finish. Very nice place to finish as well. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much for speaking with us. And as we've said, we just want to get the information out there. We want to see and show that everyone is supporting Ukraine in every possible way. So it's really nice to hear from you. And
more than happy to help. And